Make your case.
Sorry, but you also talked about unit cohesion, and that's exactly the same kind of argument that they made against integrating the military when Harry Truman did it. I'm sorry, it's the same argument. Okay. It's the same.
I mean, is she wrong about that, though?
Okay.
I mean, she is right about that.
Who did not want to serve
I'm aware.
White people didn't want to serve black people because of unit cohesion. So now you're saying gay people shouldn't serve with straight people.
We only have a couple seconds. Shermichael, I see that you're frustrated that she made that argument.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I came across this one from a few years back and it absolutely holds up. So a transgender Navy veteran, Alaina Kupec, goes up against Scott Jennings on CNN, and it turns into one of the more heated panels they've done. This aired right after the Supreme Court let the ban on transgender troops take effect while the lawsuits were still moving through the lower courts. The policy came out of an executive order signed early in the president's term, and the defense secretary then gave the services 30 days to identify transgender members and remove them from the force. So the whole fight comes down to one question, and I want your answer before you watch. Should the commander-in-chief get the final say on who serves, with absolutely no proof required? Comment yes if you think that's his call to make. Comment no if you think a decision that strips people of their careers needs actual evidence behind it. Let's get into the video.
The main argument, Alaina, that the Trump administration is making here is that that allowing transgender troops to serve hurts lethality and it hurts readiness. What do you say to that?
Well, there's no evidence of that. I think that, if that was the case, we've seen transgender people serving honorably for the last several years. And what has changed between now and then? They've just woken up to a new administration who has a different outlook on their ability to serve. So I think that, if you talk to people who are serving on active duty alongside transgender troops, they're not making these complaints. The leaders in the military are not making these complaints. These are political complaints about military service. So I think that all of the courts that have looked at this issue and looked at it, have said there's nothing in fact to back up what the government is claiming here. In fact, the judges challenged them to produce evidence, and they couldn't produce any evidence. So I think it's a really dark day for our country where basically we're allowed to discriminate against a class of people.
Scott, if they can't produce evidence that this actually does, in fact, have an impact on readiness, I mean, how is this not then just discrimination?
Well, it's the opinion of the commander-in-chief, who, according to our Constitution, is the head of the military. I mean, regardless of anyone's opinion or anybody's, whatever side you're on, whether you're for it or against it, at some juncture, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and he has and should have broad latitude to determine how the armed forces should be operated. And so I think that's what he's doing here. I think that's ultimately what the court said today, was that the president is the commander-in-chief, and we gotta respect that under our Constitution.
But I mean, to her point, if there's not a downside, and it's been going on for years now, and I mean, I'm just presenting your argument to them.
Yeah.
What is the argument other than Trump, Hegseth, just doesn't want trans people in the military?
Well, I mean, I think that the president, we'll ultimately see. I think that's why the court is allowing the president to move forward with this until it works itself through the court system. Maybe the Supreme Court will be the final arbiter here to say, yeah or nay, you can do this. But ultimately, I think the court is showcasing deference to the executive, saying that, look, you're the president, you're over the military. You do, for the most part, get to sort of dictate the standards of our military. And I don't really see how you can push back against that. Again, we'll see what happens in the court.
I can. I'm sorry, I can. What if the president wakes up tomorrow and says, I don't want any black people in the military? Do we give deference to him on that? Well, no, wait a second. It's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous because you're discriminating against a group of people in a very similar way. No,
I knew you were going to say that, but it's
excuse me. Well, I'm glad you.
I'm going to leave this one alone today.
I'm curious. Why is it ridiculous? I mean, you just said the president should be the one who just decides.
Right.
So if he decides, he wakes up tomorrow and says, I think it's bad for morale, it's bad for cohesiveness, for there to be black people in the military, Latino people in the military, just in her hypothetical scenario, what's the difference between that and what we're seeing here?
I mean, are you really going to go down this ridiculous road?
I'm
sorry.
This is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous argument.
Well, okay.
The president,
what they've already
the president and the Secretary
the
Secretary of Defense have an argument here. They believe that readiness and unit cohesion and overall operations of the military are impacted by this. That is their opinion, and that is the opinion of the commander-in-chief, who the Constitution gives broad latitude to run the armed forces. So That's their opinion. You're allowed to have one. You're allowed to have one. You're also allowed to run for president, become commander in chief yourself. But until you do, he's the commander in chief.
I have to just say, I didn't hear an answer to the hypothetical, right? I just didn't hear it.
Though.
I didn't. I mean, okay. The definition of discrimination, according to the American Psychological Association, discrimination is the unfair or prejudicial treatment of people or groups based on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. What is the difference between prohibiting certain groups like transgender people from serving versus, people based on their race or even their gender, frankly?
I personally think there's a difference, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, I will say...
Do you believe that race and... Are you saying that the quality of race and the quality of transgender are the same?
I'm just asking the question because I think you're making there's a distinction, but you're not explaining why.
No, I'm asking, you guys brought up the hypothetical. Are you arguing that someone's race is the same as someone choosing to become transgender?
Lethality and readiness. Those two words are carrying the entire weight of this policy, and the second anyone asks for actual proof behind them, the room goes completely quiet. That is not a technicality. That is the whole case, and there is nothing sitting underneath it. Alaina Kupec put it in the simplest terms possible. She said this: the judges challenged them to produce evidence, and they couldn't produce any evidence. Think about what that actually means. Government attorneys with unlimited resources and every incentive in the world to win, standing in front of a judge who is openly asking them to show one thing, one study, one commanding officer's complaint, one readiness report, and they came back with absolutely nothing. You have to understand how bizarre that is. Militaries measure everything. There are exact numbers for fitness, retention, deployment rates, and unit performance. If these troops genuinely damaged a unit, that damage would show up in a spreadsheet somewhere. It doesn't, because it simply isn't there. And here's the part that blows my mind. Nothing about these service members changed. Same people, same jobs, same clearances, same deployments. What changed was who moved into the Oval Office. That's the entire variable. When your justification is a calendar rather than a finding, you don't have a military argument, you have a political one wearing a uniform. Then the fallback arrives, and it's always the same fallback. The president is commander-in-chief, so he gets broad latitude over the armed forces. Fine, nobody is disputing who runs the military, but latitude was never the same thing as immunity. People in uniform still have civil rights, and courts still exist for a reason. So Alaina does the smartest thing you can do with an unlimited power argument. She tests where it stops. If the man in charge announces tomorrow that an entire racial group is bad for morale, does the deference still apply? Watch what happens next, because this is where it falls apart. There's no answer. There's a flinch. Shermichael Singleton's response was this: I personally think there's a difference, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Leave it at what? You just told the country that the standard is whatever the commander-in-chief believes on any given morning. If there's a limit, name it. If there's a distinction, explain it. Saying you feel a difference exists and then walking away isn't a position, it's a desperate hope that nobody notices you don't have one. And the counter question that comes back, asking whether race and being transgender are the same thing, is a pure redirect. Nobody claimed they are identical. The claim is that the argument is identical. Same structure, same reasoning, same missing evidence. That is a much harder thing to answer.
You've made the argument twice that the commander-in-chief's opinion is all that matters. You've said that twice now.
Well, under the Constitution, yes.
So if he wakes up tomorrow and says it's not okay to be gay or lesbian and serve, because that's his opinion, there's nothing to back that up. They meet the physical standards, they meet the intellectual standards, they have voluntarily decided to serve their country, to give their life for this country. So many of us don't have to. That it's the opinion without any basis in fact, that's what matters more than the Constitution of equal rights and equal protection.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the other thing, or there's a few things that bother me about this, and mostly it was the language of the policy, right? When reading at some of these words, transgender people as inherently untruthful, undisciplined, dishonorable. That's like a very weighty thing to say about people who are courageously deciding to protect this country. The other problem, Scott, is that it's never enough. It's bathrooms today. It's sports today. It's sports tomorrow. It's the military today.
No, it's also sports today, by the way.
Yeah, it is sports today. And
80% of Americans agree, by the way.
Oh, that's fine. And 80%, guess what? The majority sometimes is wrong. That also happens, right? Because the majority used to believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was somebody who was a threat, that somebody who was not a good American. The majority of people used to be against civil rights. Were they right? No, they weren't. And so the whole point is when you target one group, and inevitably that line moves to everybody else. And I'm not saying he's coming for black people tomorrow, but considering that this is a military or this is a leadership that is already using DEI as code word for black people already when it comes to the military, suddenly when you don't protect the most vulnerable, you wind up making it worse for everybody else that's in the marginalized community. You don't think trans people are vulnerable in this country?
So is it your position that the commander-in-chief should recruit people who you're describing as vulnerable into the lethal fighting force?
He should recruit people who want to serve and protect this country. And it's really kind of ironic considering he dodged the draft that he suddenly has an opinion about it.
He has an opinion because he won the election.
The good news is, and Alaina, you pointed this out. This is going through the court system. The other side has the opportunity to present evidence.
Except for tomorrow, there's going to be thousands of people who wake up and get processed out. The harm will be done.
And I certainly understand that. But again, there's still an opportunity for it to continue through the proper process.
Right, but they wake up tomorrow without a job, being removed from their commands. Operational readiness will be impacted. And so there's commands that are going to be left without leaders. There's going to be real life implications for theaters around the world where our military is protecting this country. And for what end?
Alaina, I guess my point is, if a strong enough evidence is presented throughout the court process, all the way up to SCOTUS, and it's ultimately believed, okay, hey, the other side has enough evidence where we can't rule in favor of the executive, then the executive, I believe, would respect that decision. But we have to allow this thing to move forward and see what was
your experience in the military like? Did you serve after you had transitioned, or?
No, I served before my transition.
So you weren't in during your at all?
No. I came to know that I was transgender while I was serving with a top secret and above clearance. And I knew that I couldn't pass my polygraph test. And so I had to make a tough decision. Do I stay true to my character, my values, my integrity, or do I choose to leave this role and live a private life? And so I think that the challenge is that the injunction was to allow people to continue to serve while the courts played out. Right? So there would be no harm done to these folks, giving the courts an opportunity to work through these issues so people wouldn't lose their jobs. Now they're going to wake up tomorrow without jobs. They can't just come back in for serving 22 years, waiting for this court case to work its way through for 6, 9 months, 2 years.
Watch how fast the ground shifts here. The entire defense collapses into opinion, and it gets admitted out loud. That is their opinion. That's the whole answer. An opinion with absolutely nothing underneath it. Let me break down why that matters so much. If an unproven opinion alone is enough to remove qualified people from service, then no service member is secure. Not one. Opinions change with administrations, and the next one always arrives with its own list. Alaina made the point that cuts through everything. She said these are people who have voluntarily decided to serve their country, to give their lives for this country, volunteered, in a country where almost none of us ever will. They met the physical standards, they met the intellectual standards, they passed every single gate the military put in front of them, and the reward is being pushed out over a feeling. And then there's the language of the policy itself, describing people as untruthful, undisciplined, dishonorable. That is not a readiness assessment. That's character assassination by paperwork aimed at people who raised their hand when they didn't have to. Then comes the poll. 80% of Americans agree, as if that settles anything. And Jemele Hill's answer is the one I want carved into every political argument. She said this: the majority sometimes is wrong. Here's your history, and it's documented. In 1961, when the Freedom Riders traveled through the South, Gallup polling showed most Americans disapproved of what they were doing. Not a fringe. The majority. Same story with the protest movements of that decade. The country that now names streets and holidays after those people was, at the time, telling them to sit down and stop causing trouble. Public opinion is a snapshot of what's comfortable, not a verdict on what's right. And this is the mechanic people miss. It starts with the group nobody wants to defend, because that group is small and easy to isolate. Then the reasoning gets reused. It always gets reused, because reasoning doesn't stay in the box you built it for. Then comes the line about whether the commander-in-chief should be recruiting people described as vulnerable into a lethal fighting force. That framing is completely backwards. Being targeted by a discriminatory policy doesn't make you fragile, it makes you targeted. There is nothing weak about someone someone who signs up to fight while the country argues over whether they even belong. And the timing is the ultimate cruelty. Thousands of people lose their jobs while the case is still moving through the court. Commands lose their leaders. Units lose experience that took decades to build. If military readiness were truly the concern, this is the absolute last thing anyone would do.
So you hadn't, so was there a prohibition on you transitioning while you were in the military?
Back in that time, there was a ban against serving if you were, the don't ask, don't tell policy.
This was in the mid-90s.
This was in the mid-90s. Yeah.
So, but let me, can I ask a question? Because I think this is relevant. You know, Alaina was serving, left because of this policy. How many people is it okay to lose who are competent, who are doing their jobs because for reasons like that? I mean, at the time, she could have been a gay or lesbian, and it probably would have been the same result as well. I mean, I think that's why ultimately they ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
I mean, I think
discrimination.
I think ultimately the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of Defense have to decide comprehensively about troop levels, troop readiness, and unit cohesion, and overall recruitment. They're actually quite happy with recruitment right now.
But that has there's never been a military standard that transgender people have not met. So the military standards have not been lowered for people who are transgender. And I think that's the issue here. And the courts that have looked at this issue in depth have said this is pure animus, that there is no evidence of this. So if you actually take the rhetoric out of it and look at the issue at its heart, all the courts say the same thing. So I think that's the travesty here.
I believe the president has the constitutional right to do this, and I also think you have the constitutional right to make your case on it, and everybody's going to be in court about it, and I think you should continue to make your case.
But you also talked about unit cohesion, and that's exactly the same kind of argument that they made against integrating the military when Harry Truman did it. I'm sorry, it's the same argument. It's the same argument.
Is she wrong about that, though? I mean, she is right about that.
Did not want to serve
I'm aware.
White people didn't want to serve with black people because of unit cohesion. So now you're saying gay people shouldn't serve with straight people.
We only have a couple seconds. Shermichael, I see that you're frustrated that she made that argument, but is she wrong that unit cohesion was used as an excuse to keep the military segregated for a long time?
I think we should
and
focus
also
on,
don't ask, don't tell when it comes to discriminating against gay and lesbian people.
We should focus on the issue at hand. That's what I think.
Same argument.
No, we should focus on the issue at hand. I don't know why we keep going to bringing up race. Let's just focus on the issue at hand.
Look, it's race, sexual orientation. We've seen this twice, right? In two major junctures for the military. I'm just wondering if she is drawing parallels here between the arguments that are being made to maintain this policy.
I reject those parallels. That's my answer. I reject the parallels. I think they're ludicrous parallels.
Do you feel like you had a choice in your life as to what you were going to do? Or
no.
No, of course not.
No.
The same way that I didn't have a choice to be born who I was, the same way you didn't have a choice to be born who you were. So why do we get exclusions and she doesn't?
I didn't say that Alaina should be excluded.
Okay, why, under this president's policy,
my
why?
opinion here is let it work itself through the court system.
And I have no problem with that, but just don't fire people while it's working through the courts. That's what these injunctions were doing, was letting it work through the courts. And the Supreme Court, I think, really just delegitimized itself even further today. And I think that's a challenge for all of this country when we don't have the checks and balances of the courts, checking the executive power, and Congress checking the executive power, and all of those things. Because at the end of the day, right now in the military, you can be a white supremacist, a known white supremacist, and serve in this military, but you cannot be transgender and serve in this military. That's a fact.
This is where it gets personal, and it should. Alaina came to understand who she was while serving with a top-secret clearance, and the rules of that era forced a choice between her integrity and her career. She walked away rather than live a lie. The people who talk loudest about honor and discipline should sit with that for a second, because that is what integrity actually costs. And notice what her story proved. The system already ran this exact experiment. The old policy of enforced silence lasted from 1993 until it was repealed in 2011, and the justification back then was cohesion and morale. Almost 2 decades of qualified people pushed out or forced to hide. Then it ended, and nothing collapsed. The predicted disaster never arrived because it was never real. Then Alaina says the thing that should have closed the debate. She said there has never been a military standard that transgender people have not met. Nothing was lowered. Nothing was relaxed. Everyone passed the exact same tests as everyone else. So this was never about capability, and everyone in that room knows it. Now here's your history lesson, and it is a fact. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed the executive order desegregating the armed forces. The objections at the time were not phrased as prejudice, they were phrased as practicality. Morale, discipline, unit cohesion, the exact same vocabulary. Senior officers warned that integrated units simply could not function. Then Korea came, integrated units performed, and the argument completely evaporated. Not because someone won a debate, but because reality showed up and settled it. So when that historical parallel gets raised, watch the reaction. It isn't a rebuttal, it's frustration, a request to move on, and a flat dismissal of the comparison as ludicrous. Rejecting is not refuting. If the comparison were genuinely absurd, taking it apart would take 15 seconds. Explain what makes cohesion a legitimate concern now when it was a smokescreen then. Nobody does, because the honest answer is that it's the exact same argument pointed at a new target. And then the question that strips everything down: did you have a choice about who you are? Of course not. None of us did. Nobody in that room picked the body or the wiring they were born with. So why do some people get a permanent exemption from having their existence debated, while others have to justify theirs in a courtroom? The response was that nobody said Alaina should be excluded, delivered while defending the exact policy that excludes her. You cannot support the mechanism and disown the outcome. There's no carve-out written into it for the impressive person sitting across the table. And then the closer, which I have not stopped thinking about. Alaina said this: right now in the military, you can be a known white supremacist and serve, but you cannot be transgender and serve. That is the entire issue compressed into one sentence. Someone who believes fellow Americans are lesser can wear the uniform. Someone who passed every standard and volunteered to defend all of us cannot. If readiness and lethality were really the true concern, which of those two do you think does more damage to a unit? Which one makes the soldier standing next to you less safe? The question answers itself, and that is exactly why the right wing refuses to answer it. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.